In a quiet park, an elderly woman named Clara Bennett finds peace in her daily routine, feeding the pigeons and enjoying the simple rhythms of life. But when a young girl named Emily appears one morning, frightened and alone, Clara steps up in an unexpected act of bravery, offering her safety and comfort. Little does she know, this chance meeting will set off a series of events that will not only change Emily's life, but bring new purpose and joy to her own. Join us on this heartwarming journey as Clara discovers the power of a small act of kindness, becoming a beloved figure in her community and a beacon of hope for those in need. As Clara's story unfolds, you'll see how one person's compassion can touch countless lives. Before we dive into this unforgettable tale, make sure to comment below where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to follow more inspiring stories like this one. Now let's find out what happens when a simple day at the park turns into something extraordinary. Clara Bennett was a fixture at Birchwood Park, a comforting sight to locals who had grown accustomed to her gentle presence. Every morning, rain or shine, Clara walked the half-mile from her modest apartment to the park. Dressed in her light blue cardigan and sturdy shoes, she moved with a slow, purposeful gait, her silver hair neatly pinned back. She carried a well-worn canvas tote filled with birdseed, a water bottle, and a small photo album she kept with her almost as a talisman. Today, the park seemed especially peaceful. It was early spring, and the air held the slightest chill, which Clara didn't mind. The sky was clear, a few white clouds lazily drifting above, and a soft breeze stirred the branches of the cherry blossom trees lining the walking path. Clara found comfort in the rhythm of her routine. She would arrive, greet the pigeons that gathered at her feet, and sit on the same bench beneath a tall maple tree. Her bench overlooked the children's playground, where she watched kids on swings, slides, and seesaws. She loved hearing their laughter drift over, reminding her of days long gone when her own children were young, chasing each other around the yard, squealing with delight. Though her children had since grown and moved away, leaving Clara to a quiet and solitary life, she still felt connected to the world through these simple observations. Clara settled into her usual spot, smiling as the first few pigeons began to gather around her feet, bobbing their heads in eager anticipation of a treat. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small paper sack of birdseed, and scattered a handful across the ground. The pigeons pecked with enthusiasm, their feathers shimmering in the morning sun. For a moment, Clara's mind drifted back to memories of her children, of sticky-fingered hugs and bedtime stories. Her heart warmed with nostalgia, though there was a tinge of loneliness too. Life had become so quiet, and the park offered her a sense of community and belonging she hadn't found anywhere else. Just as Clara was about to toss another handful of birdseed, she noticed a figure moving along the edge of the playground. A young girl, perhaps 8 or 9, with blonde hair tied in a loose braid, stood alone. Clara felt a pang of curiosity mixed with concern. Children didn't often wander the park alone, especially so early in the day. The girl, wearing a bright yellow dress and worn sneakers, glanced over her shoulder, her expression filled with unease. Clara's heart tightened slightly. She knew the look of a child who felt uncertain, and it set off something protective in her. The girl's gaze drifted to Clara, and their eyes met for a brief moment. Clara offered a soft, reassuring smile, hoping to ease whatever worry seemed to weigh on the child. After a hesitant pause, the girl started walking toward her. Each step seemed tentative, almost as if she were struggling to decide whether or not she should reach out for help. As the girl drew closer, Clara noticed the tension in her small face, the way her shoulders were hunched, and how she continued to glance behind her as though fearful of being followed. Clara shifted slightly, making room beside her on the bench, and patted the empty space. "Hello there, sweetheart," Clara said in her warmest voice. "Are you all right? You look like you've had quite the morning already." The girl hesitated, clutching the straps of her little backpack tightly. I don't know," she murmured, barely meeting Clara's eyes. Clara felt a wave of empathy. She could sense that the girl needed a safe place, perhaps someone who would listen without judgment. "Why don't you sit here for a moment, dear?" she suggested gently. "It's a lovely day to enjoy the park, isn't it?" The girl nodded, sliding onto the bench next to Clara. They sat in silence for a few moments, Clara feeding the pigeons and allowing the girl to settle. She didn't press the child to speak, knowing that some children just needed a little time to feel safe. After a few minutes, the girl broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name's Emily," she said, as though it was a secret. Clara smiled, grateful for this small show of trust. "It's lovely to meet you, Emily. My name is Clara. I'm here every morning feeding my little friends." She tossed another handful of bird seed, and the pigeons swarmed, much to Emily's quiet amusement. Emily watched the birds, her expression softening for the first time since she had approached. "They really like you," she observed. "They're good company," Clara replied, glancing at Emily. "Sometimes we all need a bit of company, don't we?" Emily nodded slowly, a faint smile touching her lips. Clara noticed her shoulders relax slightly, though the girl still cast occasional glances around the park. Something was clearly bothering her, and Clara felt a deep urge to protect this little girl, whoever she was, from whatever was causing her such unease. As they sat, Clara became increasingly aware of the park's unusually quiet atmosphere. Joggers and dog walkers who usually populated the area were sparse, and the usual hum of city life seemed distant. She scanned the area, her gaze lingering on a figure at the park's entrance, partially obscured by a tree. Clara's pulse quickened. A man stood there watching the two of them from a distance. He was too far away to make out his expression, but something about his posture and the way his gaze lingered made her uneasy. Clara turned to Emily, her voice calm but steady. "Is everything all right, Emily? You seem a little nervous. You can tell me if something's bothering you." Emily's eyes flickered toward the man near the entrance, her voice trembling slightly. He's been following me. I didn't know where else to go." The words sent a chill through Clara's heart. She tightened her grip on Emily's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Her mind raced as she thought of how best to reassure the girl without raising her own alarm. "You did the right thing coming here, Emily," Clara said softly. "You're safe with me. I'll make sure nothing happens to you." Emily looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. Clara kept her tone light and comforting, all the while reaching into her bag to discreetly retrieve her phone. She held it in her lap, pretending to check the time as she quickly dialed 911, murmuring quietly as though speaking to an old friend. "Yes, of course," Clara said brightly, maintaining the appearance of a casual phone call. "It's such a beautiful day to meet at the park, isn't it? I'll be waiting right here." She hoped the dispatcher on the other end would understand her subtle distress call. As she ended the call, Clara looked back at Emily, her voice soft and reassuring. "You're safe with me, Emily. We'll just sit here and enjoy the fresh air, won't we?" Emily nodded, her grip on Clara's hand relaxing slightly, though her gaze remained fixed on the distant figure. They sat together in silence, the minutes stretching out with an uncomfortable stillness. Clara continued feeding the pigeons, occasionally making light-hearted remarks to keep Emily's spirits up. She spoke about the birds, telling Emily about how they often brought their young to the park in spring, and how one of the birds with a distinctive brown feather had been coming to visit her for years. Emily listened intently, and Clara noticed the girl's breathing begin to slow, her anxiety gradually melting into curiosity and comfort. She pointed out a sparrow hopping near their feet, making Emily laugh softly as it pecked at crumbs. Clara's calm demeanor hid her own growing unease. She kept her posture relaxed, but her gaze flickered frequently to the path where she had last seen the man. Every passing moment without the arrival of police made her more apprehensive, though she continued chatting, never letting on to Emily the gravity of the situation. Finally, after what felt like hours, but had only been minutes, the sound of sirens echoed faintly through the park. Relief flooded Clara, but she remained composed, giving Emily's hand a final squeeze. "The park is always full of surprises, isn't it, dear?" Clara said, a note of warmth in her voice as the flashing lights of a police car came into view. "You're very brave, Emily. Remember that." This extended part 1 sets the stage with rich characterization, a gentle build-up of suspense, and a heartfelt connection between Clara and Emily. The details invite readers to experience Clara's quiet courage and Emily's gradual trust, leading naturally into the tension that peaks as they await rescue. The pacing keeps within YouTube's guidelines, emphasizing warmth, connection, and protective bravery over explicit tension or distress. As the police car pulled to a halt near the park entrance, Clara exhaled a quiet sigh of relief, though she kept her face composed for Emily's sake. The sirens turned off, and two officers stepped out of the car, scanning the area. Clara raised her hand in a small wave to catch their attention, and they quickly made their way over. "Hello, ma'am," said Officer Ramirez, a tall man with kind eyes and a reassuring presence. He knelt down to Emily's level, offering her a gentle smile. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Emily clutched Clara's hand a little tighter, her gaze shifting between Clara and the officer. With a quiet nod, she finally managed to speak. "Yes, I think so. I was just scared." Officer Ramirez nodded understandingly, his voice calm and even. "I understand. You're very brave for telling us. We're here to make sure you're safe." He glanced at Clara, gratitude evident in his eyes. "And thank you, ma'am, for looking out for her." Clara nodded, giving a small squeeze to Emily's hand. "This young lady showed a lot of courage coming here," she said, her voice filled with pride. She knew she needed help, and that takes bravery. Officer Ramirez turned to his partner, who nodded in silent agreement before moving off to survey the park's perimeter, keeping an eye out for the suspicious figure. Clara watched as Emily's shoulders relaxed further. The presence of the officers seemed to finally allow her to breathe. With the second officer moving to patrol the area, Officer Ramirez sat on the edge of the bench, leaning toward Emily and Clara as he spoke in a gentle tone. "Can you tell me a little more about what happened, Emily? Did you see the man before today?" Emily looked down at her shoes, her voice soft but steady as she replied. "He was outside the restaurant near my school," she said, her small voice wavering slightly. "It was a chicken place, and he was standing by the door when I left with my friends. He said he knew my family and wanted to walk me home, but I didn't know him." Her fingers tightened slightly around Clara's. "I got scared and ran." Clara felt a deep pang in her heart for the girl. The vulnerability in Emily's voice made her feel an even greater sense of protectiveness. She could sense how overwhelming the experience must have been for such a young child. Yet Emily had shown incredible wisdom in seeking out help. Officer Ramirez gave her an encouraging smile. "You did exactly the right thing by not going with him, Emily. You're a smart girl, and you were right to listen to that little voice that told you something wasn't right." Emily seemed to grow a little taller at his words, a small sense of pride replacing her fear. Clara patted her shoulder, feeling a swell of affection for the girl. "You're safe now, Emily," Clara assured her. "And you can always come find me here in the park if you need anything." Emily nodded, finally allowing herself to smile, her gratitude unspoken but clear in her eyes. The two officers exchanged a glance, understanding the bond that had formed between Clara and Emily in such a short, intense time. After Officer Ramirez finished gathering the necessary information, he gave Clara a respectful nod. "You've done an incredible thing today, ma'am," he said. "Not everyone would have taken the time to help like this." Clara shook her head, humility coloring her tone. "I just did what anyone would do," she replied, though she knew that wasn't always the case. "This park is a safe place for so many people. I couldn't bear the thought of anything bad happening here." Ramirez's eyes softened. "Well, Birchwood Park is a little safer today, thanks to you." His words touched something deep in Clara. She'd always loved the park, but now it felt like she'd left her own mark on it. It was more than a simple place to spend her mornings. It had become a place where she could still make a difference. Meanwhile, the other officer returned, shaking his head to indicate that the suspicious man had slipped away. Ramirez's brow furrowed, but he kept his voice calm. "We'll keep an eye out, Emily. If anything feels off again, you can tell your parents or your teacher, or come see us at the station, okay?" Emily nodded, looking much more at ease. Clara gave her a gentle nudge. "You did wonderfully today, Emily," she whispered. "Never be afraid to speak up when something feels wrong." Emily looked up at Clara, her eyes wide with trust and gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Clara," she whispered. Her voice held a mixture of relief and admiration, and Clara could feel the weight of Emily's gratitude pressing against her heart. As the officers finished up, Emily's mother arrived, visibly shaken but relieved as she spotted her daughter. She quickly crossed the park, wrapping Emily in a hug that was as fierce as it was loving. "Oh, Emily!" Her mother's voice trembled as she held her daughter close. "I was so worried. Thank goodness you're all right." Emily nestled into her mother's arms, reassured by her presence. She reached back for Clara's hand, unwilling to let go of the woman who had become her guardian in such a short time. "Mom, this is Ms. Clara. She helped me when I was scared." Emily's voice was soft, her admiration for Clara evident. Emily's mother looked up, gratitude shining in her tearful eyes. "Thank you," she said to Clara, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you enough. You were there for her when she needed someone most." Clara smiled gently. "I was glad to help. Emily's a brave girl, and she just needed a bit of support." She reached out, giving Emily's hand a final reassuring squeeze. As Emily and her mother began to walk away, Emily turned back, her eyes shining with newfound confidence. "Will you be here tomorrow, Mrs. Clara?" Clara chuckled softly. "I think I might be. After all, my little feathered friends would miss me if I stayed away too long." Emily beamed, waving goodbye as she and her mother left, the tension of the morning slowly melting into a sense of peace and relief. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Clara remained seated on her bench, her heart full and her mind racing with thoughts of the day's events. It was the first time in years she'd felt such purpose, such a clear calling. She'd spent so much of her life in the service of others as a teacher, guiding children, and offering comfort and protection. But life had changed, and with her children grown and scattered, Clara had drifted into a quiet solitude, feeling like the world had moved on without her. Today had reminded her, however, that she still had the capacity to make a difference. It was a revelation as soft as a whisper, but as solid as the bench beneath her. The park, with its towering trees and gentle birds, had become more than a quiet retreat. It had become a place where Clara felt seen, needed, and valued. She decided then and there that she would return the next day and the next, as long as her legs would carry her. If she could offer a little bit of comfort and protection to the community, she would do it gladly. As the pigeons fluttered at her feet, Clara tossed one last handful of seeds, watching them gather with grateful eyes. She had never imagined that a simple morning in the park could lead to a moment of such clarity, but she welcomed it wholeheartedly. This part of the story builds on Clara's bond with Emily, introducing a broader sense of purpose and gratitude that deepens Clara's connection with the park and her community. The characters share moments of relief, bravery, and newfound confidence, setting the stage for Clara's transformation and the promise of future connections. This ensures the story remains within YouTube's guidelines, emphasizing Clara's protective nature and Emily's courage, while creating an atmosphere of community and resilience. The tone balances suspense and emotional warmth, showcasing Clara's impact on Emily and her family without focusing on fear or distress. The following morning, Clara rose early, her steps light with a sense of purpose that felt as new as it did familiar. She hadn't felt this way in years, and she welcomed the warmth that settled over her heart. As she prepared her morning tea, she thought about Emily's innocent, trusting eyes, the way they had silently pleaded for help. In that moment, Clara realized how much a small act of kindness could mean, especially to someone who was vulnerable and in need. Arriving at the park, Clara settled into her familiar bench with a feeling of contentment. The birds greeted her with their usual enthusiasm, flocking to her feet as she scattered seeds. But today, her mind was far from her feathered friends. She found herself watching each child who passed by, wondering about their lives, their worries, and their joys. She noticed a mother pushing a stroller, a group of teenagers chatting animatedly by the fountain, and an elderly couple walking arm in arm. As she sat there, she imagined each person as if they were pages in a story, each one with their own chapter and plot twist. Birchwood Park was like a living novel to her now, filled with people who each carried their own invisible burdens. In her heart, Clara felt a gentle stirring, a resolve to make a difference, no matter how small, for as long as she could. True to her word, Emily returned that afternoon with her mother. As soon as Clara spotted her small figure bounding across the grass, she felt her heart leap with joy. Emily's face lit up when she saw Clara, and she ran over, hugging her tightly, a gesture that Clara hadn't expected but welcomed wholeheartedly. "Mrs. Clara, "I'm so happy you're here," Emily said, her voice bright with excitement. Clara chuckled softly, patting Emily's back. "Well, I promised I'd be here, didn't I?" She gave Emily a warm smile. "How have you been, my dear?" Emily's mother, Sarah, joined them, a grateful smile on her face. She extended a hand to Clara, her voice thick with sincerity. "Thank you again, Ms. Clara. I can't tell you how much it means to me. To both of us. Emily hasn't stopped talking about you." Clara smiled, humbled by their gratitude. "It was my pleasure. Emily's a brave young lady and she did the right thing." Sarah nodded, her expression a mixture of pride and lingering worry. "I was wondering, Ms. Clara, if it's not too much trouble, could we meet you here a few times a week? Emily's always been quiet, but I can see how much comfort she finds in spending time with you." Clara's heart swelled. "Of course. I'd love that. It's nice to have company, and Emily has a special place in my heart." The arrangement brought Clara more joy than she had felt in years. Over the coming weeks, she and Emily met regularly, sitting on the bench as Clara told stories from her years as a teacher, sharing memories and life lessons. Emily listened with wide-eyed wonder, her innocent questions and insightful remarks making Clara feel alive, understood, and needed. Word began to spread about Clara and her small act of kindness. Neighbors and park regulars heard about how Clara had been there for Emily in her moment of need, and slowly, more people began to approach her. Some brought baked goods or small tokens of appreciation, while others simply stopped to chat, drawn to Clara's calming presence. One chilly afternoon, as Clara was setting out her birdseed, a mother and her young son approached her, smiling warmly. "You're Clara Bennett, aren't you?" the woman asked, holding her son's hand as he looked up at Clara with admiration. Clara nodded, her cheeks tinged pink with modesty. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" The woman's smile widened. "My son Jonah heard about how you helped Emily. He's been excited to meet you and wanted to say thank you." Jonah shuffled shyly, then extended a crumpled drawing toward Clara. "It's for you," he said softly, looking at her with big, hopeful eyes. Clara unfolded the drawing to find a child's rendition of herself sitting on the park bench, surrounded by pigeons and smiling children. Her heart melted at the sight, and she smiled, tucking the drawing carefully into her bag. "Thank you, Jonah. This is one of the nicest gifts I've ever received," she said, ruffling his hair. Jonah beamed, and his mother's face softened with gratitude. "You've made a real difference in this park, Mrs. Clara," she said. "People feel safer knowing you're here." Clara's eyes sparkled. She hadn't set out to make any changes in her small corner of the world, but seeing how her simple act of kindness had brought people together filled her with a sense of fulfillment that she hadn't felt since her teaching days. One rainy afternoon, when the park was quiet and her usual visitors had stayed home, Clara found herself reflecting on the journey she'd begun with Emily and her community. She had always thought her life's purpose was over when she retired, that her role as a caretaker had ended when her own children grew up and moved away. But sitting on that familiar bench, listening to the gentle patter of raindrops on the leaves, Clara realized that her purpose had simply changed form. She remembered how Emily had first approached her, frightened and alone, and how that brief moment of trust had led to a friendship she hadn't known she needed. Clara now understood that her presence in the park wasn't just about watching the birds or enjoying her solitude. It was about being there for others, a steady presence in a world that could feel chaotic and uncertain. With each passing day, Clara felt herself becoming more deeply connected to the community. She was no longer a solitary figure sitting quietly on a bench. She was Clara Bennett, the guardian of Birchwood Park, as some had affectionately begun to call her. That spring, the park held a small community event to celebrate the season. Clara was invited as an honorary guest, much to her surprise. She arrived to find the park decorated with colorful banners and balloons, children's laughter filling the air as they played games, and parents mingled with familiar smiles. To her delight, Emily was there with her family, along with Jonah, his mother, and a handful of other families Clara had come to know through her time at the park. The air was filled with warmth and camaraderie as people approached Clara, expressing their appreciation and sharing stories of how her presence had touched their lives. As the day drew to a close, Emily tugged on Clara's sleeve, pulling her aside. "Mrs. Clara," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "I made something for you." From her little backpack, Emily pulled out a hand-painted rock, its surface covered with bright colors and the words, "Thank you," written in careful, blocky letters. Clara took it, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you, Emily. I'll treasure this always," she said, hugging the girl tightly. Emily's mother joined them, smiling at Clara. "You know, Mrs. Clara, you're like family to us now. We'd love for you to join us for dinner sometime, if you'd like." Clara nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I'd love that more than anything," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. She realized in that moment that she had gained more than she'd ever expected. She had found a family, a community, and a purpose that extended beyond herself. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the park, Clara looked around at the faces surrounding her. She knew that her role here had only just begun, and she welcomed it with open arms. In the weeks that followed, Clara became a beloved figure in the community. Parents brought their children to meet her, to hear her stories and learn her gentle wisdom. She continued to visit the park every day, her presence a comforting fixture in the lives of the people who had come to know her. One evening, as she sat on her bench, Clara watched the children playing and the families gathered around, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. Her journey from a solitary retiree to the guardian of Birchwood Park had been unexpected, but it had brought her joy, fulfillment, and connections that she would cherish for the rest of her days. With a contented smile, Clara leaned back, her heart full and her spirit renewed. She knew that the park would continue to be her home, her sanctuary, and a place where she could make a difference, no matter how small. And as the last rays of sunlight danced through the trees, Clara closed her eyes, feeling truly at peace. This expanded section builds Clara's role in the community, showing how a single act of kindness can create ripples that transform lives. The warmth of her bond with Emily and the growing admiration of her neighbors highlight Clara's enduring impact on Birchwood Park, creating a heartfelt, family-friendly narrative that emphasizes courage, community, and belonging. Absolutely. Here's the final arc, which brings a sense of resolution and fulfillment for Clara, while showing the lasting impact of her kindness on Birchwood Park and its community. This part highlights Clara's meaningful relationships and how her presence continues to inspire and comfort others. Summer arrived in Birchwood Park, bringing with it a lively hum of activity. Clara noticed familiar faces from all walks of life gathering in the park with their families, chatting, laughing, and enjoying the warmth of the season. Each morning as she sat on her bench, Clara welcomed greetings from old and new friends alike. She marveled at how her life had transformed. Her once quiet days were now filled with connection and purpose. On one particular day, Clara was joined by Emily and her mother, Sarah, who had brought a picnic lunch. They spread out a blanket beneath the shade of a large oak tree, sharing sandwiches and fruit. Sarah mentioned how Clara's influence had brought Emily out of her shell, inspiring her to speak up, be herself, and trust her instincts. "Ms. Clara, I told the kids at school about you," Emily said between bites of her sandwich, her eyes shining with admiration. "Now they all want to meet you." Clara chuckled, touched by the girl's enthusiasm. "Well, I'd be delighted to meet them too," she said, patting Emily's hand. "And remember, it was your bravery that made all this possible. I was just here to listen." Sarah smiled, her voice soft. "You don't know how much that means to us, Clara. You've brought such light into our lives." Clara felt her heart swell with gratitude, realizing that she had not only found companionship, but had also become part of a community that valued her deeply. It was a beautiful season of belonging, something she had never expected to find in her later years. One bright August afternoon, as Clara was feeding the pigeons, a young man in a crisp blue uniform approached her. His face was familiar. It was Officer Ramirez, who had been there for Emily and Clara that memorable day in the park. Clara waved, her eyes lighting up at the sight of him. "Officer Ramirez, how lovely to see you," she said, setting down her bag of birdseed. "Ms. Bennett, it's great to see you too," he replied, smiling. "I actually came here to invite you to a small gathering at the community center. The police department and a few community leaders want to honor you for everything you've done for the neighborhood." Clara felt her cheeks warm with surprise. "Oh goodness, I wasn't expecting that," she said, a mix of modesty and pride in her voice. Officer Ramirez chuckled. "You're a hero to a lot of people here, Mrs. Bennett. We'd love for you to be there. There's going to be a little ceremony, and I think you'll find some familiar faces." Clara nodded, touched by the invitation. She hadn't imagined that her small act of kindness would ripple out this far, but she felt honored to be recognized. She graciously accepted, her heart brimming with gratitude. The day of the gathering arrived, and Clara dressed carefully, choosing a floral blouse and a delicate string of pearls. She arrived at the community center to find it beautifully decorated, with balloons, banners, and tables filled with refreshments. Familiar faces greeted her, and she was overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection from everyone who had come to celebrate. Emily was there with her family, beaming with pride. Jonah and his mother were there as well, along with other families, children, and neighbors Clara had met through her days in the park. As she made her way through the crowd, each person offered their thanks and admiration, and Clara felt a warmth settle over her, stronger than anything she'd felt in years. Officer Ramirez took the podium, his voice clear and heartfelt. "Today, we honor Mrs. Clara Bennett, a woman who turned a simple act of kindness into a legacy of compassion. Ms. Bennett has shown us that courage comes in many forms, and that our community is only as strong as the bonds we create within it." He turned to Clara, his eyes shining with respect. "Ms. Bennett, you're an inspiration to us all. Thank you for being a guardian, a friend, and a role model for our community." Clara felt tears prick her eyes as the room erupted in applause. She stepped up to the podium, a little shy but filled with a sense of fulfillment. "Thank you," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't set out to be anything special. I was just here in the park when Emily needed someone. I'm grateful to all of you for allowing me to be a part of your lives. You've given me a purpose I never expected to find again, and for that, I'm deeply thankful." As she spoke, Clara saw smiles all around her, and she knew she had found her place in this small but vibrant corner of the world. She finished her speech, wiping away a few happy tears as she embraced Emily, who ran up to her with a bouquet of wildflowers. Fall arrived, painting the trees of Birchwood Park with hues of orange, red, and gold. Clara continued her daily visits, now joined by children who came to hear her stories, parents who stopped to chat, and friends who brought small gifts as tokens of appreciation. She became something of a local legend, a figure of wisdom, kindness, and stability that people came to rely on. One afternoon, as she sat on her usual bench, she noticed a young boy sitting alone nearby, his shoulders slouched and his expression downcast. Clara's heart went out to him, and she made her way over, sitting beside him quietly. "Hello, dear," she said gently. "Mind if I sit with you?" The boy looked up, a bit surprised, but nodded. He introduced himself as Ben, sharing that he'd had a difficult day at school and felt like no one understood him. Clara listened, nodding as he spoke. She shared stories of her own childhood, of feeling misunderstood and different, and encouraged him to see the beauty in his uniqueness. By the time they finished talking, Ben's face had softened, and he looked at Clara with gratitude. "You know, Mrs. Clara," he said shyly, "you make things seem not so scary." Clara smiled, patting his hand. "We all need someone to remind us of that from time to time, don't we?" It was moments like these that made Clara realize her role in the park had grown beyond what she had ever imagined. She was now a confidant, a mentor, and a friend to people of all ages. Her bench became a place of comfort and hope, where anyone could come to find a listening ear and a kind word. As winter approached, Clara's presence in Birchwood Park remained constant. The chilly air and shorter days didn't keep her from her daily visits, where she would bundle up and sit with her favorite blanket, greeting the people she'd come to think of as family. The pigeons, ever faithful, gathered around her, offering a sense of familiarity that warmed her heart. One day Emily came to visit with a small group of her friends, each of them clutching a flower or a homemade card. They handed them to Clara, shy but proud, thanking her for being their friend and making the park feel like a safe, magical place. Clara was moved beyond words, her heart swelling with love for each child. "You're all so special to me," she said, hugging each of them in turn. "Thank you for letting me be part of your lives, As she watched them run off, their laughter filling the air, Clara realized that her journey had come full circle. She had set out each morning in search of peace and solitude, only to find a family, a community, and a purpose that enriched her life in ways she could never have anticipated. The years went on, and Clara continued to be a beloved presence in the park. Even as she grew older and her steps slowed, her spirit remained vibrant, touching the lives of everyone who crossed her path. Parents shared stories of her kindness with their children, and Birchwood Park became known as the place where anyone could find a listening ear. Thanks to Ms. Clara Bennett. When Clara finally passed away, the community held a memorial in the park, gathering by her bench to share stories of how she had touched their lives. They dedicated the bench in her honor, engraving it with the words, "In memory of Clara Bennett, a guardian, a friend, a blessing." As they stood there surrounded by the beauty of Birchwood Park, each person knew that Clara's legacy would live on. Her gentle spirit, her acts of kindness, and her unwavering love for her community had left an indelible mark, one that would be cherished for generations to come. And as the sun set over the park that evening, casting a warm glow over the trees, it seemed as though Clara was still there, watching over her little corner of the world, a guardian in spirit, forever part of the heart of Birchwood Park.